Manager wants you out. Private property. Step away from the counter now.
I have a reservation and I was told to wait. I haven't been trespassed or asked to leave.
Quit the lawyer talk, hands where I can see them, and show me ID before this gets worse.
My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket. Check them first.
Officer Derek Vance had been wearing a badge for 6 years, and in that time he had cost the taxpayers of Charlotte nearly $500,000 in nuisance settlements. But he was about to break his own record. He was 32 years old, patrolling with the kind of swagger that suggested he believed the law was something he enforced, not something he was bound by. He had a reputation in the precinct locker room as a hard charger, a euphemism that older, wiser officers used to describe a liability waiting to happen. On a bright, cloudless Thursday morning in October, Vance was cruising down Independence Boulevard, scanning the streets for trouble, unaware that he was 20 minutes away from a decision that would end his career and cost the city $4.1 million. The setting for this catastrophe was not a dark alley or a high-crime neighborhood, but the pristine fluorescent-lit lobby of Apex Rentals, located just 3 miles from the international airport. It was 10:15 a.m., and the morning rush of business travelers had largely subsided, leaving the lobby quiet. The floor was polished white tile. The walls were adorned with posters of scenic drives along the Pacific Coast Highway, and the smell of industrial cleaner hung heavy in the air. Standing at the far end of the counter was Marcus Thorne. At 46 years old, Thorne cut an impressive figure. He stood 6'2", wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Officer Vance's monthly salary, a crisp white Oxford shirt, and a silk tie knotted with military precision. He was a black man in a space that, to some, signaled service worker or driver, but his posture suggested command. He was leaning casually against the high counter, scrolling through emails on his secure government-issued smartphone, waiting for the branch manager to locate the keys to a specific black Chevrolet Tahoe he had reserved weeks in advance. Thorne wasn't impatient. He didn't tap his foot or sigh loudly. He understood logistics. He understood that sometimes paperwork got misplaced. He was a man accustomed to waiting for things that mattered. However, the stillness of his demeanor seemed to agitate the energy in the room, specifically the energy of the man behind the counter. Thorne had already been waiting for 20 minutes, a delay, caused by a computer glitch, or so he was told. He had no idea that his patience was being weaponized against him. He had no idea that a radio call was already bouncing off the local towers, dispatching a patrol unit to investigate a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises. To anyone observing with an unbiased eye, Thorne looked exactly like what he was, a high-level professional waiting for a rental car. But biases are rarely about what is seen. They are about what is felt. And on this particular Thursday, the feelings of a nervous manager and an aggressive police officer were about to collide with the reality of a man who held a top-secret security clearance and the weight of the Federal Bureau of Investigation behind him. Marcus Thorne was not a man who sought the spotlight. In his 19 years with the FBI, he had never kicked down a door for the cameras or stood behind a podium at a press conference. He was a senior intelligence analyst, a title that carried immense weight within the intelligence community, but meant very little to the average civilian. His battlefield was the digital landscape and the financial spider webs that funded domestic terror cells. He had spent the first decade of his career at the NSA before being headhunted by the Bureau for his ability to see patterns in encrypted communications that others missed. Thorne was in town to coordinate a multi-agency task force regarding a localized threat involving the movement of unregistered firearms across state lines. The rental car, a specific make and model with tinted windows, was a requirement for the surveillance operation he was overseeing later that afternoon. He wasn't carrying a firearm. Analysts rarely did unless they were in a combat zone. His weapon was his intellect, his clearance, and his ability to dismantle lives through federal indictments. He was the quiet professional, the man who ensured that when the tactical teams moved in, they were at the right house at the right time with the right warrants. Behind the counter, watching Thorne with a growing sense of unease, was Brett Sterling. Sterling was 29 years old, the branch manager of this Apex Rentals location. He had been in the job for 8 months, promoted rapidly due to a staffing shortage, and he wore his polyester uniform polo with an inflated sense of importance. Sterling considered himself the first line of defense for the company's assets. He had read articles online about rental car fraud rings of thieves who used stolen identities to lease luxury SUVs and ship them overseas. To Sterling, nothing about Marcus Thorne added up. In Sterling's worldview, black men didn't come in at 10 a.m. on a Thursday wearing $2,000 suits just to rent a Tahoe. They didn't stand that still. They didn't have phone screens that looked like walls of encrypted text. Sterling had asked for Thorne's credit card 3 times, running it through the machine and scrutinizing the name. Marcus A. Thorne. It sounded fake to him. It sounded too generic. The credit card was a heavy metal Amex Platinum, the kind that usually signaled wealth, but Sterling had convinced himself it was a high-quality forgery. "I'm just waiting on the system to clear the authorization code." Sterling had lied 5 minutes ago. In reality, the authorization had cleared instantly. The car was ready. The keys were in his pocket. But Sterling was stalling. He was watching Thorne type on his phone, convinced that the man was communicating with a crew outside, perhaps waiting for a signal to rob the place or force Sterling to hand over the keys. It was a fantasy born of prejudice and fed by fear. A narrative constructed entirely in Sterling's mind, completely detached from the reality of the calm, middle-aged civil servant standing 5 feet away. The mind of a biased individual is a powerful engine for fiction. As the minutes ticked by, Brett Sterling's internal narrative grew more elaborate and more dangerous. He watched Thorne tap his screen. Thorne was actually replying to an email from the assistant U.S. attorney regarding a subpoena, and Sterling interpreted it as a signal. "He's getting impatient," Sterling thought. "He's checking the time. The crew must be close." Sterling retreated into the back office, ostensibly to check on the vehicle, but in reality to make a phone call that would ruin his life. He picked up the landline and dialed the police non-emergency number, though his voice carried the panic of a 911 dispatch. "This is the manager at Apex Rentals on Wilkinson Boulevard," Sterling whispered, peering through the slat in the blinds. "I have a situation here. There's a male subject in the lobby who is behaving aggressively and refusing to leave." The dispatcher, trained to filter information, asked the standard questions. "Is he armed? Is he threatening you?" "I don't see a gun, but he's huge." Sterling exaggerated, adding 3 inches and 50 pounds to Thorne's frame in his mind. "He's been loitering here for 30 minutes. I denied his rental because his card looked fake and he won't leave. He's making the female staff very nervous. I think he's casing the place for a robbery. He's texting people constantly." It was a cascade of lies. Thorne had not been denied. He had not been asked to leave. There was no female staff working that morning. It was just Sterling and a detailer out back. But Sterling knew the buzzwords that would get a reaction. Aggressive, refusing to leave, nervous staff. He was painting a picture of a predator projecting his own discomfort onto a man who was simply checking his email. "We have a unit in the area," the dispatcher said. "Officers are en route. Do you want him trespassed?" "I want him gone," Sterling said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "Just get someone here before he does something." He hung up the phone and took a deep breath, feeling a surge of righteous power. He was protecting his store. He was taking action. He walked back out to the counter, forcing a tight, nervous smile. "System is still slow, sir. Just another minute." Thorne looked up, his eyes sharp and intelligent behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Take your time," he said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded respect. "I have a meeting at noon, but I have a cushion." Sterling swallowed hard. A meeting at noon, he thought. Probably a drug deal. The disconnect between reality and Sterling's perception was now absolute. He wasn't seeing a customer. He was seeing a caricature. and he had just summoned a man who viewed the world through the exact same distorted lens. Officer Derek Vance received the call on his terminal at 10:38 a.m. The text on his screen read, "Suspicious person/loitering/disturbance. 4200 Block Wilkinson Boulevard. Complainant states male subject refusing to leave, possibly casing business." Vance didn't need more than that. His mind instantly filled in the blanks. In his 6 years on the force, he had developed a policing philosophy that relied heavily on instinct, which was often just a cover for profiling. He visualized a homeless man screaming at customers, or perhaps a gang member trying to intimidate a clerk. He didn't consider that it might be a misunderstanding. He didn't consider that the manager might be lying. To Vance, the call was the truth, and the subject was the problem. He flipped his lights on for a brief second to cut through the intersection, then killed them as he pulled into the Apex Rentals lot at 10:45 a.m. He parked his cruiser directly in front of the glass doors blocking the handicap ramp, a subtle power move he performed without thinking. He adjusted his utility belt, checked the tightness of his tactical gloves, and exited the vehicle. He was ready for a confrontation. He was looking for a fight. Vance pushed through the glass doors, the bell chiming cheerfully above him. The contrast between the bright, sterile lobby and Vance's aggressive posture was jarring. He didn't look for the manager. He didn't assess the scene for safety. His eyes locked immediately on the only black man in the room. Marcus Thorne was still standing at the counter, looking down at his phone. He heard the door chime and the heavy tread of boots, but he didn't look up immediately. He assumed it was another customer. Vance marched across the tile floor, stopping 6 feet from Thorne. He hooked his thumbs into his vest, widening his stance. "Hey!" he barked, his voice echoing off the hard surfaces. "Partner, we need to talk." Thorne looked up slowly. He saw the uniform, the badge, the aggressive stance. He saw the nameplate, D. Vance. He folded his phone and placed it calmly on the counter, face down. "Officer," Thorne said, his tone polite but neutral. "Is there a problem?" "That depends on you," Vance said, stepping closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "Manager says you're causing a disturbance, says you were asked to leave and you're refusing. That true?" Thorne blinked, genuinely confused. He glanced at Sterling, who was now cowering behind the computer monitor, avoiding eye contact. "I haven't been asked to leave," Thorne said, turning back to Vance. "I'm renting a vehicle. The manager told me the computer system was down and asked me to wait." Vance scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on the nerves. "Yeah, well, he called us. So evidently you're not renting anything. This is private property. If he wants you gone, you go. You don't stand here arguing." "I'm not arguing," Thorne said, his voice remaining level, though his pulse began to tick upward. He recognized the demeanor. He had seen it in intelligence reports about bad policing, but he had rarely experienced it this directly. "I have a reservation. I have provided my credit card. I am simply waiting for the keys." "You're trespassing," Vance interrupted, his hand drifting near his taser. "And now you're failing to comply with a lawful order. I don't care about your reservation. Grab your stuff and step outside. Now!" This is the moment where training and temperament are supposed to prevail. A seasoned officer would have spoken to the manager first, verified the story, or simply asked the gentleman to step aside to clear up the confusion. But Derek Vance was not interested in clarity. He was interested in submission. Thorne knew the law better than Vance did. He knew that trespassing required a prior warning to leave, which he hadn't received. He knew that he had a contract at the reservation that gave him a legitimate reason to be there. But he also knew that arguing the law on the street with an agitated officer was a losing proposition. "Officer," Thorne said, keeping his hands visible on the counter, "there is a misunderstanding here. I am a federal employee. I am here on official business. If you allow me to show you my credentials—" "I didn't ask for your life story," Vance shouted, his face reddening. The mention of federal employee didn't register as a warning. It registered as a lie. Vance had heard every excuse in the book. I know the mayor. I'm a lawyer. I'm federal. I told you to leave. You're refusing. Now you're under arrest. Thorne stiffened. I am not refusing. I am attempting to identify myself. He slowly moved his right hand toward the inside pocket of his suit jacket, a movement he had performed thousands of times to retrieve his wallet. Don't reach, Vance screamed. He didn't wait for compliance. He lunged. Vance grabbed Thorne's right wrist with a crushing grip, twisting it violently behind Thorne's back. The motion was intended to off-balance a suspect, and it worked. Thorne, caught off guard by the sudden violence, stumbled forward. Vance used the momentum to slam the older man chest first onto the rental counter. The sound of the impact, a sickening thud of bone against laminate, echoed through the lobby. Stop resisting, Vance yelled, playing to the camera he knew was recording, creating a justification for his force. I am not resisting, Thorne gasped. The wind knocked out of him. His cheek was pressed against the cold counter. You are making a mistake. I am a senior analyst with the FBI. Check my pocket. Shut up. Vance grabbed Thorne's other arm, wrenching it back with unnecessary force. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt and ratcheted them onto Thorne's wrists, tightening them until the metal bit into the skin. The lobby was silent. Sterling watched from the back, his mouth open, realizing he had started an avalanche he couldn't stop. A couple entering the front door froze, pulling out their phones to record. Thorne didn't struggle. He didn't kick. He stood up slowly when Vance yanked him upright. His suit was rumpled, his glasses were crooked, and his dignity had been assaulted, but his mind was crystal clear. He looked Vance directly in the eyes. My credentials are in my inner left pocket, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. You have just assaulted a federal officer. You have detained me without probable cause. I strongly suggest you verify my identity before you put me in that car. Vance laughed. It was a nervous, arrogant sound. I'll verify you downtown, buddy. Impersonating a federal agent. That's a felony. Let's go. He shoved Thorne toward the door, parading him past the witnesses, past the terrified manager, and out into the bright, unforgiving morning sun. The back of a police cruiser is a cage designed to strip away humanity. It smells of stale sweat vomit and industrial disinfectant. The hard plastic seat offers no comfort. For Marcus Thorne, sitting with his hands cuffed behind his back, the physical discomfort was secondary to the professional calculation he was running in his head. As Vance drove toward the central precinct, the radio crackling with routine chatter, Thorne remained silent. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He simply memorized. He memorized the time, 10:52 a.m. He memorized the route. He memorized the officer's erratic lane changes. He was building a case file in his mind, organizing the evidence just as he would for a counterterrorism operation. Vance glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the suspect to be yelling or pleading. The silence unnerved him. Quiet back there, huh? Thinking of a better lie than I'm with the FBI? Thorne met his eyes in the mirror. I'm thinking about your pension, Officer Vance, and how it's about to disappear. Vance slammed on the brakes slightly harder than necessary at the next red light. Keep talking. I'll add threatening an officer to the charge sheet. They arrived at the precinct 10 minutes later. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage doors rolling down behind them. He hauled Thorne out of the car, gripping his bicep like a trophy catch. They walked through the booking intake, past the holding cells, and up to the main desk. The watch commander on duty was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran who had seen everything. He was tired, he was close to retirement, and he had a low tolerance for incompetence. He looked up from his paperwork as Vance wrestled Thorne toward the bench. Miller's eyes narrowed. He saw the expensive suit. He saw the demeanor. He saw a man who didn't fit the profile of the usual Thursday morning disorderly conduct arrest. What do you have, Vance? Miller asked, leaning back in his chair. Trespassing, resisting, and impersonation, Vance announced proudly. Guy wouldn't leave a rental place, then tried to tell me he's a Fed. Miller looked at Thorne. He saw the calm, burning intelligence in the man's eyes. He felt a prickle of warning at the base of his neck. Sir, Miller said to Thorne, respectful by habit. Name, Marcus Thorne, he replied clearly. Senior Intelligence Analyst, Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket along with my PIV card. Officer Vance refused to check them before assaulting me. Vance rolled his eyes. Sarge, he's full of it. He was loitering at a rental counter. Miller stood up. He walked around the desk. Vance, shut your mouth. He approached Thorne. May I? Please, Thorne said. Miller reached into the jacket pocket. His fingers brushed the fine silk lining. He pulled out a black leather credential case. He opened it. The gold seal of the Department of Justice caught the fluorescent light. The photo was clearly Thorne. The title was Bold Senior Intelligence Analyst, Top Secret/SCI Clearance. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the ID, then at Thorne, then at Vance. He closed the case and held it up to Vance's face, his hand shaking slightly with rage. Is this the fake ID, Vance? Miller whispered, his voice deadly quiet. Is this the impersonation? Vance squinted at it. It looks real, but anyone can buy those online. It's real, you idiot, Miller roared, the sound echoing through the booking area. I've worked with the task force. I know what these look like. You just arrested a federal agent. Miller turned to the computer and punched in the badge number. It took 3 seconds. The screen flashed red with a restricted access warning, confirming the identity and flagging the query for immediate notification to the Bureau. Miller looked at Vance with a mixture of pity and disgust. Uncuff him. Now. The sound of the handcuffs unlocking was the loudest noise in the room. Vance's hands were trembling so badly he fumbled with the key twice. When the metal finally clicked open, Thorne brought his hands forward. His wrists were bruised, deep red welts forming where the metal had dug in. He rubbed them slowly, grimacing, but his composure remained absolute. Agent Thorne, Sergeant Miller said, his voice wavering. I can't tell you how sorry I am. This is a catastrophic failure of procedure. Thorne adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. He put his glasses back on. He looked like a titan returning to his full height. He ignored Vance completely, treating him as if he had ceased to exist. He focused solely on the sergeant. Sergeant Miller, Thorne said. I need the use of a secure phone. I need to contact the special agent in charge at the Charlotte field office. And I need the name of this officer's union representative because he is going to need one. Yes, sir. Right here, sir. Miller pushed a phone across the desk. Vance stood there pale and sweating. Sarge, The manager said, Give me your badge, Vance. Miller said, not even looking at him. What badge? Gun on the desk. You're done for the day. Probably done forever. Go sit in the break room and don't talk to anyone until Internal Affairs gets here. Within 45 minutes, the precinct was swarming. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the entrance. 4 men in suits, actual field agents, walked in. They weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to collect their colleague and ensure the documentation of the incident was preserved. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that the air in the station felt thin. Meanwhile, at Apex Rentals, the consequences were arriving with equal speed. Thorne had made one other call to the corporate headquarters of the rental agency. He hadn't demanded anything. He had simply stated the facts. I was profiled by your manager. I was falsely reported. I was arrested. By 1:00 p.m., a district manager walked into the Apex lobby. Brett Sterling was called out of the back office. He was fired on the spot for violation of corporate anti-discrimination policies and for making a false police report. He was escorted off the property, leaving his keys on the counter where he had watched Marcus Thorne just hours before. Sterling walked to his car unemployed and facing potential criminal charges for the false report, his hero moment having turned into a total self-destruction. The wheels of justice grind slow, but when they are greased with a $4.1 million lawsuit, they can move with surprising efficiency. The city of Charlotte knew they couldn't win. The evidence was overwhelming. The 911 call recording proved Sterling lied. The body camera footage proved Vance lied. The witnesses in the lobby provided video of a calm man being assaulted by an aggressive officer. The lawsuit Thorne versus City of Charlotte named Officer Derek Vance the police department and the rental agency. It alleged unlawful arrest, excessive force, racial profiling, and violation of civil rights. The discovery phase threatened to expose not just Vance's history, but the department's habit of ignoring red flags. Vance had 7 prior complaints for similar behavior profiling minority suspects, escalating nonviolent situations, and he had been cleared every time by a review board that rubber-stamped his aggression. To avoid a public trial that would have dissected the department's internal affairs process on national television, the city settled. The figure was $4.1 million. Apex Rentals settled separately for an undisclosed amount rumored to be in the high 6 figures. Derek Vance was fired 3 weeks after the incident. The Fraternal Order of Police declined to fight for his reinstatement after the body cam footage was leaked to the press. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he would never work as a police officer in the state again. Marcus Thorne remained with the FBI. He didn't retire on the settlement money, though he could have. He went back to work because he believed in the mission. But he was different. The quiet confidence was still there, but it was guarded now. He drove a new car bought with his own money, and he avoided rental counters. On quiet evenings, he would look at the faint scars on his wrists. He was a man who protected the nation, a man with the highest clearance the government could grant a man of wealth and education. And yet on a Thursday morning in October, none of that had mattered. To Officer Vance and Manager Sterling, he was just a black man standing in the wrong place. The money was in the bank, but the lesson was burned into his soul. Legitimacy is a fragile thing, often granted or revoked at the whim of the most ignorant person in the room with a badge. How many others, Thorne wondered, had stood at that counter or walked down that street without an FBI credential in their pocket? How many lives had Vance destroyed before he picked the wrong victim? We must ask ourselves, why do we allow systems to protect officers with patterns of bias until it costs millions to stop them? And what happens to the citizens who cannot fight back? If this story moved you, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Do you think officers should carry personal liability insurance for misconduct? Subscribe for more stories that bring the truth to light.
Up off the bench.
No. We got complaints. This isn't a hangout spot.
It's a public bench.
I'm a customer and I'm disabled.
I'm waiting for the bakery truck.
Don't argue with me. Show ID and drop the stick or you're going in cuffs.
That's my cane. Touch it and you're assaulting a disabled veteran on camera. Think before.
Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the streets of Sunnyvale for a little over 4 years, long enough to develop a swagger, but not long enough to cultivate wisdom. He was 29 years old, fit, aggressive, and operated under the dangerous delusion that his badge granted him immunity from consequences. He was the type of officer who referred to citizens as civilians with a sneer, believing that authority was something you took, not something you earned. On a bright Tuesday morning in October, Vance made a decision that would not only end his career in disgrace, but would force the city to write a check for $1.6 million. He walked into a situation armed with arrogance and bias, completely unaware that the man he was about to humiliate had given more to his country than Vance could ever comprehend. Before we get into the details of this infuriating encounter, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe that respect is a two-way street, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We bring you these stories because the truth matters, and accountability is the only way forward. The Sunnyvale Farmers Market is a local institution. Located in the heart of the historic district, it's an open-air gathering place that operates every Tuesday and Saturday. It's the kind of place where neighbors catch up, where the smell of fresh kettle corn hangs in the air, and where the community feels safe. The market is lined with white tents selling organic produce, artisanal jams, and fresh-baked goods. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was high and warm, and the aisles were bustling with retirees, stay-at-home parents, and professionals taking a late morning break. It was a picture-perfect American morning until the dispatch radio crackled in Vance's patrol car. He was parked 2 blocks away, scrolling through his phone, bored and looking for something to do. The call came in as a suspicious individual refusing to leave the market area. The caller, a vendor named Brenda, sounded frantic, claiming she felt threatened by a man loitering near her booth. Vance didn't ask for details. He didn't ask if a crime had been committed. He heard suspicious and refusing to leave, and his mind immediately painted a picture. He put the car in gear and sped toward the market, already deciding how he was going to handle the situation. He didn't plan to investigate. He planned to dominate. In his 4 years on the force, Vance had racked up 6 complaints for discourtesy and 2 for excessive use of force. Both force complaints were dismissed by Internal Affairs as within policy, reinforcing his belief that he was untouchable. He parked his cruiser illegally in a loading zone right at the market's entrance, the lights flashing unnecessarily against the bright morning sun. He stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, his sunglasses hiding eyes that were scanning for a target. He wasn't looking for a problem to solve. He was looking for a person to break. He marched past the market manager, who tried to flag him down to explain the situation, and headed straight for the location Brenda had described. He saw the subject sitting on a bench, and in Vance's mind the narrative was confirmed. He saw a threat. The city of Sunnyvale was about to pay dearly for his lack of judgment. Major Elias Thorne, U.S. Army retired, was not a man who looked for trouble. At 58 years old, he had seen enough conflict to last 10 lifetimes. He had served his country for 28 years, starting as an enlisted infantryman and rising through the ranks to retire as a field-grade officer. He had led men in Panama, the Balkans, and finally Afghanistan. It was in the Kandahar province 7 years ago that his career in the field ended. An improvised explosive device. IED had detonated under his convoy vehicle. The blast had taken the hearing in his left ear and shattered his right leg. Surgeons had saved the leg barely, but the damage was permanent. Elias walked with a heavy limp and required the use of a sturdy hand-carved oak cane to get around. The cane wasn't a prop. It was a necessity, a constant reminder of the price he had paid for the flag he loved. Despite the pain that flared up on humid days, Elias carried himself with an upright, rigid posture that screamed military discipline. He kept his hair high and tight, his face clean-shaven, and his clothes immaculate. That Tuesday, Elias was dressed in a crisp navy blue polo shirt, khaki slacks pressed with a military crease, and polished leather loafers. He wasn't homeless. He wasn't a vagrant. He was a homeowner who lived 3 miles away in a subdivision he had chosen for its quiet streets. He had come to the market for 2 things: heirloom tomatoes for a salad and a loaf of sourdough bread from the bakery stand that only arrived after 10 a.m. He had purchased his tomatoes and placed them in a canvas tote bag. The bakery truck was late, so Elias had done what any reasonable person with a shattered leg would do. He found a bench and sat down. The bench was public property situated near a stall selling artisanal jams. Elias checked his watch, a heavy tactical timepiece he'd worn for 2 decades, and rested his hands on the head of his oak cane. He closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face, listening to the hum of the market. To anyone paying attention, Elias Thorne looked exactly like what he was: a dignified, aging warrior enjoying a quiet morning. He was a man of immense patience and integrity. He was a deacon at his church and a volunteer at the local VA hospital, helping young soldiers navigate the bureaucracy of benefits. He believed in order in law and in the fundamental goodness of his community. He had no idea that simply sitting on a bench while black would be enough to strip him of that dignity in the eyes of the law. He sat there, a Purple Heart recipient, a Bronze Star holder, waiting for bread, while a storm named Officer Vance was barreling toward him. Brenda Miller was 38 years old and had been selling her homemade jams at the Sunnyvale Farmers Market for 3 seasons. She considered herself the self-appointed guardian of the market's atmosphere. She was the type of person who monitored the parking lot for cars that didn't look like they belonged and kept the non-emergency police line on speed dial. Her stall, Brenda's Berry Best, was located right next to the public bench where Major Thorne was sitting. Brenda had been watching Elias for 10 minutes. In her mind, his presence was a disruption. He hadn't bought anything from her. He was just sitting there. To Brenda, a large black man sitting still was not a customer. He was a potential problem. She saw him check his watch and interpreted it as him timing the security patrols. She saw him close his eyes and interpreted it as him being under the influence of something. She saw the canvas tote bag at his feet and wondered if he was using it to steal merchandise. Her bias was a quiet, corrosive thing. She didn't use slurs. She used words like uncomfortable, safety, and loitering. She convinced herself that her unease was based on intuition rather than prejudice. He's driving away customers. She muttered to herself, though the market was bustling and no one else seemed to notice the man on the bench. In fact, a young couple had just walked past him, and Elias had politely pulled his legs in to let them pass. Brenda didn't see the courtesy. She only saw the intrusion. After 15 minutes, Brenda decided she had endured enough. She didn't speak to Elias. She didn't ask if he needed help or if he was waiting for someone. She stepped behind her display of strawberry preserves, pulled out her cell phone, and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? I'm at the farmer's market on Main, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a whisper, creating a drama that didn't exist. There's a man here who is refusing to leave. He's been loitering right in front of my stand for 20 minutes. He's making me and my customers very uncomfortable. Is he aggressive, ma'am? Has he threatened anyone? The dispatcher asked. He's glaring at people. Brenda lied, watching Elias looking at the bakery stand down the row. And he has a large stick or club with him. I'm worried he might use it. He just doesn't look like he belongs here. Please send someone before something happens. We have an officer in the area, the dispatcher said. Brenda hung up, feeling a surge of self-righteous satisfaction. She believed she was protecting the community. She believed she was doing the right thing. She looked at Elias, who was now checking his phone, unaware that his mere existence in that space had just been criminalized. Brenda turned back to a customer, a smile plastering her face, completely disconnected from the devastation she had just set in motion. She wanted him gone. She had no idea that her call would expose the ugly underbelly of the town's policing and cost the taxpayers millions. Officer Vance didn't walk through the crowd. He cut through it. His presence was kinetic and aggressive. People stepped out of his way, conversations stopping as he passed. He wasn't scanning the crowd for safety. He was locked onto the coordinates Brenda had given. He saw the bench. He saw the black man. He saw the club. Elias Thorne was responding to a text message from his wife asking if he wanted to pick up dinner on the way home when a shadow fell over him. He looked up, expecting perhaps a neighbor or the baker. Instead, he found Officer Kyle Vance towering over him, hand resting casually but menacingly near his holstered firearm. You need to move along, partner, Vance said. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the casual disrespect Vance reserved for people he deemed lesser. Elias blinked his mind, processing the tone. He didn't stand up immediately. His leg was stiff and sudden movements were painful. He slowly lowered his phone to his lap and met the officer's gaze with the steady, steel-eyed look of a man who had stared down warlords. Excuse me, officer, Elias said, his voice deep and calm, the voice of a man accustomed to giving orders, not receiving them from children in uniform. I said, time to go, Vance snapped, stepping closer, invading Elias's personal space. We got complaints. You're loitering. This is a market for paying customers, not a homeless shelter. The insult hung in the air. Elias felt a flash of anger, but he tamped it down instantly. Discipline. Always discipline. I am a paying customer, officer, Elias said, gesturing to the tote bag at his feet. I've purchased produce, and I am waiting for the bakery stand to open. I am sitting on a public bench. I don't see any receipt, Vance said, looking at the bag with disdain. And the manager wants you gone. So you can walk away, or I can help you walk away. Elias looked past Vance and saw Brenda watching from her stall, her arms crossed, a look of vindication on her face. He understood immediately. I have done nothing wrong, Elias said, shifting his weight. I have a right to be here. I am a citizen of this town, and I am resting my leg. If there is a specific crime I am suspected of, I'd like to know what it is. Vance bristled. He hated jailhouse lawyers. He hated when people knew their rights. He expected fear, and when he got confidence instead, he interpreted it as resistance. You want to get smart? Vance's voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers. I'm giving you a lawful order. Disperse. A lawful order must be based on a law. Elias corrected him gently but firmly. Sitting on a public bench in a public park during operating hours is not a crime. I am not blocking the path. I am not disturbing the peace. I am simply existing. Vance's face flushed red. He was losing control of the interaction, and his ego couldn't handle the public defiance. He decided right then that he didn't care about the law. He cared about winning. Let me see your ID, Vance demanded, extending his hand. Elias sat perfectly still. He knew the law better than Vance did. He knew that in this state this was a Terry stop situation. An officer needed reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime to demand identification. Being black on a bench didn't qualify. Officer, Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. I am not required to identify myself unless I am being detained for a crime. Am I being detained? You're being detained for trespassing. Vance lied. It was a weak pretext. It was a public park. You cannot trespass in a public park unless you have been formally trespassed by the authority having jurisdiction, Elias said. Has the Parks Department asked me to leave? Vance had had enough. He stepped back and keyed his radio, though he didn't speak into it. It was a theater of intimidation. Stand up, Vance barked. Now, hands where I can see them. Elias sighed. He knew where this was going. He knew that any sudden move would be interpreted as a threat. I'm going to stand up, Elias announced clearly for the benefit of the people who were now stopping to watch. I have a disability. I need to use my cane to stand. I am reaching for my cane. Elias moved his right hand slowly toward the oak cane resting against the bench. Drop the weapon, Vance shouted, jumping back and drawing his taser. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. It is a cane, officer, Elias said, freezing his hand. I am a disabled veteran. I cannot stand without it. I said don't touch it, Vance yelled. He was adrenaline dumping now, his training failing him completely. He saw a large man reaching for a heavy object. He didn't hear veteran. He didn't hear disability. He only heard his own panic. Get on the ground. Do it now. I physically cannot get on the ground easily, Elias said, his voice straining to remain calm. If you force me down, you will injure me. I am a retired field-grade officer of the United States Army. You are making a mistake, son. Take a breath. Calling him son was the final straw for Officer Vance. He holstered the taser and lunged forward. He wasn't going to wait for compliance. He was going to enforce it. I told you what to do, Vance grunted. Elias didn't fight back. He had the training to dismantle the young officer in seconds, but he knew that if he raised a hand, he would be shot. He chose survival. He chose to let the injustice happen so he could fight it later in a courtroom. Vance kicked the oak cane away. It clattered loudly across the pavement, spinning out of reach. Without his support, Elias's injured leg buckled. He instinctively reached out to the bench to catch himself, but Vance was already on him. The officer grabbed Elias by the shoulder and the back of his polo shirt, using his momentum to hurl the older man toward the ground. Elias hit the concrete hard. His glasses flew off. A sharp, blinding pain shot up his right leg as the metal pins and reconstructed bone jarred against the pavement. He groaned a deep, guttural sound of agony. "Stop resisting!" Vance screamed, dropping his knee onto the small of Elias's back, driving the air from his lungs.
"I am not resisting."
Elias wheezed, his cheek pressed against the dirty asphalt.
"I am in pain. My leg."
"Hands behind your back." Vance grabbed Elias's left wrist and wrenched it up toward his shoulder blades with unnecessary force. By now, a crowd of 20 or 30 people had formed a circle. Phones were out. The cameras were rolling. "He didn't do anything." A man in a baseball cap shouted from the crowd. "He was just sitting there." "That's a cane, you idiot, not a weapon," another woman yelled. Vance ignored them. He was in the tunnel now. He grabbed Elias's other hand and slapped the handcuffs on, ratcheting them tight. Too tight. The metal bit into the skin of Elias's wrists.
"Officer."
Elias said, his voice tight with pain but surprisingly steady. "You are arresting Major Elias Thorne, U.S. Army, retired. I have a reconstructed right leg and shrapnel in my lower back. You are currently injuring a disabled veteran. I want this documented." "Shut up," Vance panted, pulling Elias up. Because Elias couldn't use his leg, he was dead weight. Vance had to drag him, making it look like Elias was refusing to walk. "He can't walk. Look at his leg." The crowd was getting hostile now. "Get his cane." Vance didn't get the cane. He left it lying on the ground. He dragged Elias across the pavement to the patrol car, opened the back door, and shoved the decorated officer inside like a sack of garbage. Elias had to contort his stiff leg to fit, grimacing in silence. As Vance slammed the door, he looked back at the crowd. He saw the phones. He saw the anger. For a split second, doubt crept in. But he pushed it down. He was the law. The law was always right. He walked back, picked up the cane, and threw it in the trunk. Then he got in the driver's seat and peeled away, leaving the market in stunned silence. The drive to the precinct was short and silent. Elias sat in the back, eyes closed, regulating his breathing to manage the pain radiating from his leg. He was memorizing everything. The time, the speed, the officer's badge number 492, the lack of seatbelt, the aggressive braking. He was building his case file in his head. When they arrived at the station, Vance pulled Elias out of the car. Elias stumbled, his leg useless without the cane. Vance had to practically carry him to the booking desk. Sergeant Miller was the watch commander that day. He was 55 years old, a career cop who believed in community policing and common sense, two things that were absent from this arrest. He looked up from his paperwork and saw Vance dragging a well-dressed, gray-haired black man into the holding area. Miller noticed the quality of the man's clothes. He noticed the military haircut. He noticed the way the man held his head up despite being manhandled. "Vance, what do we have here?" Miller asked, coming around the desk. "Trespassing, resisting failure to ID." Vance recited the script. "Suspect refused to leave the farmer's market. Got aggressive. Had a weapon." "A weapon?" Miller looked at Elias. "You searched him. He had a club. It's in the trunk." "It is a cane sergeant." Elias spoke up. His voice filled the room. "I am Major Elias Thorne. I am a Purple Heart recipient. That officer kicked my medical device away and assaulted me." Miller froze. He looked at Vance, then back at Elias. "Uncuff him. Now." "Sarge, he was—" "I said uncuff him," Miller roared. Vance fumbled with the keys and removed the cuffs. Elias rubbed his wrists, which were bleeding slightly. "Major," Miller said, his tone shifting to respectful urgency. "Do you have identification?" "In my back pocket," Elias said. "Wallet." Miller gestured for permission, then gently removed the leather wallet. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the blue retiree's ID card. Major Elias Thorne, USA, retired. Behind it was a card identifying him as a Purple Heart recipient, granting him priority access to VA services. Miller looked at the ID. Then he looked at Vance. The look was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You arrested a field-grade officer for a cane." Miller whispered the silence in the room heavy. "He refused to ID," Vance stammered. "He was acting suspicious. He's a 58-year-old disabled veteran buying vegetables." Miller slammed the wallet down on the counter. "Did you verify the complaint? Did you ask for a supervisor?" Vance had no answer. Miller turned to Elias. "Major, I need to get you a chair. Do you need a medic?" "My leg is likely re-injured," Elias said calmly. "I need my cane. And I want to file a formal criminal complaint against this officer for assault and battery." "Get his cane, Vance," Miller ordered. "And then give me your badge and gun. You're done for the day. You might be done forever." Vance walked out to the car, his legs feeling heavy. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a cold pit of dread. He realized finally that he wasn't the predator. He was the prey, and he had just walked into a trap of his own making. The fallout was swift and catastrophic for the city of Sunnyvale. The video footage from the bystanders hit the internet before Elias was even released from the hospital, where he was treated for a hairline fracture in his previously reconstructed tibia. The image of a 29-year-old officer kicking a cane away from a 58-year-old black veteran went viral globally. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The dignity of the major versus the thuggishness of the officer. The headlines wrote themselves. "Hero handcuffed. Purple Heart profiling." The city attorney took one look at the police body cam footage, which confirmed everything Elias and the witnesses said, and told the mayor to settle immediately. There was no defense. Vance had violated Fourth Amendment rights Americans with Disabilities Act protections and department policy. If this went to a federal jury, they wouldn't just award millions. They would dismantle the department. The settlement was agreed upon in 3 weeks, $1.6 million, to Major Elias Thorne. Officer Kyle Vance was fired 6 days after the incident. The chief of police didn't just fire him. He submitted his name to the state decertification board, ensuring Vance would never wear a badge in any state again. Vance tried to fight it through the union, but even the union wouldn't touch this. He was left unemployed, disgraced, and facing a potential civil rights lawsuit of his own. Brenda Miller, the vendor who made the call, faced her own reckoning. The release of the 911 tape revealed her lies. The community boycotted her stand. The Farmers Market Board permanently revoked her vendor license for violating their code of conduct regarding harassment. She lost her business because she couldn't stand the sight of a black man sitting on a bench. But money and firings don't fix the leg. Major Thorne spent 6 months in physical therapy to regain the mobility he lost that day. He never went back to that farmer's market. We often talk about supporting the troops in this country. We put bumper stickers on our cars and wave flags on holidays. But true respect isn't a slogan. It's how we treat people when they aren't in uniform. It's acknowledging that a man's dignity shouldn't depend on his ability to produce an ID card on command. Major Thorne fought for freedom abroad only to have it stolen from him at home by a man who swore to protect him. Systemic bias doesn't always look like a burning cross. Sometimes it looks like a nervous vendor and an arrogant cop on a sunny Tuesday morning. It looks like the assumption that a black man resting is a black man loitering. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for settlements when they violate civil rights, or should the taxpayers foot the bill? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and please share this story. We have to keep shining a light on these injustices until the shadow of bias is gone for good.